Moderator of the session Food Loss and Waste Mitigation in Brazil. I'm very happy to have this joint session with my Brazilian colleagues, and we will have 6 presentations, each about 10 minutes. And afterwards, we will have some time left to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to use the Q&A section, not the chat, but the Q&A section, and we will try to answer as much questions as possible. So I would like to start with my introduction because I'm the first speaker. And my name is Felicitas. I work at the Thünen Institute in Germany. This is a federal research institute dealing with issues of agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. And I deal with food loss and waste since 20 years, almost 20 years. Yes, I started in 2001. And today I would like to, now we can start. And I will give an introduction into the topic by introducing the challenges and opportunities of food loss and waste action for Latin American and Caribbean countries. So I'm the coordinator of the collaboration initiative on food loss and food waste launched at MEX. And MEX means the Meeting of Agricultural Chief Scientists of G20 countries. You might know that G20 countries are the 20 largest economies in the world, and the Meeting of Agricultural Chief Scientists is a small subgroup of this organization. The aim of our initiative is to concentrate the research and political consulting capacities in order to mobilize a noticeable reduction of food loss and waste on a global scale. This sounds very theoretically, but we also conduct some practical issues. And for example, since 2015, each G20 Agri-Ministers Declaration addresses food loss and waste. This sounds not very practical, but this is a very important political commitment towards the importance of food loss and waste, and also to declare the responsibility of the G20 countries with this respect. We also conducted or elaborated an expert and project platform. You can see the link here. And this expert and project platform should facilitate the international sharing of knowledge and experiences. And you are very welcome to use this platform. It's free of charge. You can find experts for specific topics of food loss and waste, specific commodities, or levels of the food supply chain. And of course, if you are an expert yourself, please register and share your experiences in this platform. We conduct also annual regional workshops on the topic of food loss and waste in cooperation with the corresponding G20 presidency. The G20 presidency changes every year from one country to the next one. And in 2018, Argentina hosted the G20 presidency. And we conducted a joint workshop on the topic for the Latin American and Caribbean countries. So for all of you who are not so familiar with the global challenge of food loss and waste, I would like to give a brief introduction of the challenges or the most important issues. So in general, 1/3 of all edible food which is produced on a global scale is wasted. And this sums up to 1.3 billion tons of food. And especially in the first part of the food supply chain, food is lost. And this is especially true for emerging and developing countries. If you translate this amount of food which is wasted into a monetary loss, you can see that the total sum of $1 billion which are lost per year is more than the GDP in Argentina and Venezuela together. So a huge loss of opportunities. But also if you have a look at the global greenhouse gases, you can see that food loss is equal to 6 times the global aviation emissions. So a huge contribution of food loss and waste towards an economic problem, an environmental problem, sorry. And because our conference is hosted in Switzerland, I would like to highlight that the blue water footprint of food loss and waste is equivalent to 3 times the volume of Lake Geneva. So you can see a lot of important context from food loss and waste to economic and environmental issues. But if we have a look at food and food waste challenges in Latin American and Caribbean countries, we can see also the close connection to the social issue. Over 127 million tons of food which is wasted in the region could cover the food requirements of 300 million people. So this is half of the population of the inhabitants of the region. On the other side, the problem of hunger could be decreased in the last decades, although some economies are more affected than others in the region. For example, a quarter of the population of Bolivia and Venezuela still suffer with undernourishment. And of course, these framework conditions dramatically changed due to the COVID-19 crisis. And I think that my colleague Gilma will address this issue also in the next presentation. The fruit and vegetables, of course, due to their perishable character, are mainly wasted in the region, and this directly leads to another environmental impact. If you have a look at the resources which are lost during the production of food, which is not eaten at the end, you also have to keep in mind that at the end of the food supply chain, when you dispose the food, this could lead to considerable emissions to the environment due to the landfilling, the direct landfilling without any pre-treatment. This is not so common in Europe or other regions anymore, but in Latin American countries, this is a very common disposal option also at present. But there are not only problems, there are also a lot of opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean countries. And I would like to address some of the developments in the last years. FAO started a regional strategy for the reduction of food loss and waste in 2014. And in next year, there was the first regional dialogue dealing and addressing the food loss and waste. And there, the idea was born to promote the reduction of food losses and waste also as a strategy against hunger, poverty, and malnutrition. So we have a very close connection of environmental and economic issues to the social issue. The Regional Alliance for the Prevention and Reduction of Food Loss and Waste aims to achieve the SDG 12.3 already in 2025. So this is a very ambitious target. The regional workshop we conducted in cooperation with FAO, Latin America, and Argentina in 2018 was the starting point for the call for action. This call was signed by important stakeholders, and these stakeholders are listed here on my slide, and they form together the Sin Desperdicio platform. I hope my pronunciation was something similar to the correct one. And since 2018, this platform organizes regional summits, workshops, supports the development of national strategies, and also to implement measuring different levels of the food supply chain. So we will talk about Brazil in the remaining session, but now I would like to pick out some examples from Argentina. The Secretary of Agro-Industry, this is the responsible ministry in Argentina, established a national program for food loss and waste reduction in 2015. And the process of implementing different activities was facilitated by the regional workshop, where additional networks could be started and cooperations could be enhanced. The awareness campaign in Argentina towards food loss and waste reduction is called Food Value Boosting, and it's addressed to the society as a whole. And there is a very interesting network of food banks which redistribute the surplus food to people in need, we had an excursion to some of the facilities, and it's really a very good work which is done at these food banks in Argentina. Argentina celebrates on the 29th of September the National Day to reduce food loss and waste. And this was the idea to also have an international day to reduce food loss and waste. And so Argentina started with a proposal to the United Nations to introduce this international day. And finally, this proposal was successful last year. And this year we will celebrate this International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste the first time on the 29th of September. So how can we further facilitate the food loss and waste reduction on a global scale, but also in specific at the Latin American and Caribbean countries? So I think the cooperation is key for tackling food loss and waste on different levels, so regional, national, and global level. This is why we have this joint session today. And of course, if you are from the region or from elsewhere in the world, please use and register at our expert platform to facilitate the exchange of knowledge. And if you are dealing with national food loss and waste strategies, or if you measure food loss and waste on a national or regional scale, please have a look at the call for papers. We would like to have a lot of papers from different countries. And of course, don't miss September 29th, the International Food Loss and Waste Day. So with this starting information, I would like to open the floor to the Brazilian colleagues. If you have any questions, don't forget, please use the Q&A section or contact me afterwards. And so for this, I would like to stop the sharing of my screen and hand over or introduce to Gilmar Hens, my Brazilian colleague. He's an agronomist, and he has also experience as a plant pathologist. He works for the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. It's called Embrapa, for decades. And he's very experienced with different positions and tasks, not only in Brazil, but also in South Africa. At the moment, he is Embrapa's focal point to the national team responsible for the SDG 12.3 in Brazil. And he will introduce the current situation of food security and food loss and waste in Brazil. So Gilmar, please switch on your camera and your microphone and start your presentation. The floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to talk about the current situation of food security and some thoughts about food losses and waste in Brazil as a starting point for my colleagues to complete the information. So what I intend to talk today is about a few topics, like a background on food security in Brazil, like a very quick timeline. Then I will talk about the current situation of the Brazilian economy. Then what happened to food supply with the COVID-19 pandemic. And then some measurements taken by the Brazilian government concerning food security in the country. Then I will share some information about the new normal in food security caused by the pandemic. Then I will also address food losses and waste, and at the final point, I will talk about future prospects. So very quick food security background in Brazil. I divided in two points. From the beginning in 1940s until the 1990s, the pioneer person that worked with hunger and food security in Brazil was Josué de Castro, a notorious Brazilian that published a book called Geography of the Hunger, Geografia da Fome in Portuguese. And he put the subject on the political agenda. He was concerned about problems with hunger related to labor and general health. Then later on, in 1976, the first national program on food security and nutrition was launched by the then called the National Institute of Food Security and Nutrition. And then later on in 1985, we have the National System of Food Security and Nutrition that launched a more comprehensive concept of food security in the country. Then after the redemocratization period, beginning in the 90s, Betinho was a very famous Brazilian sociologist who started a social movement against hunger that it was a civil society movement. And this pressed the government to also make some public policies to tackle the hunger in the country. So in 1993, we have the CONSEA, the National Committee for Food Security and Nutrition. And then in 23, we have the Zero Hunger Strategy, that everybody knows, the Zero Hunger Strategy. And then one year later, we have the Bolsa Família, the social grant scheme by the Brazilian Ministry of Social Development. And in 2010, the human right to food was also part of the Brazilian constitution by a decree. So this is a quick view on the background of food security in Brazil that I wanted to share. I also divided the food security in Brazil linked to the economic and agricultural development. So until the 60s, Brazil suffered from chronic hunger. Part of the Brazilian population suffered hunger because the agricultural production was not enough for the internal supply. Basically, Brazil produced commodities for export like sugar cane and also coffee. So the internal supply of food was not good, and there was a general food insecurity in the country. After the 60s, Brazil started economic growth with a rapid and fast process of urbanization. Also, we experienced an agricultural expansion, both geographically to new areas like the Central Brazil area, the Cerrado area, but also by adopting new technologies that boost production, like the Green Revolution technologies, meaning equipment, machinery, chemical fertilizer, and so on. So by this period, we achieved the full domestic food supply. From the 90s, Brazil started to export also various agricultural products like soybeans, meat, and others, and also started the public policies concerning for food security. The most famous one is the Zero Hunger Strategy of 2023. So in the last couple of years, we experienced some backwards steps in some food security policies. But at the same time, we started to work with the SDG 12.3, the sustainable consumption, more related to food losses. And also Kaizen, the National Committee to Food Security and Nutrition, published a national strategy to mitigate food losses and waste that will be addressed later on. So what happened with the Brazilian economy right now with the COVID-19 pandemic? First, the Brazilian GDP, as happened in other countries, shrank about 9.7% in the second trimester. That's huge. What caused a drop in the household consumption of 12.5%. The economic crisis increased the social inequality, a serious problem in Brazil, and obviously the crisis affected more poor and low middle classes people. So we estimate that 60 million people lost some income in Brazil, considering that Brazilian population is more or less 209 million people. Also, we experienced some rise in unemployment. So we expanded the social grants scheme to some emergency cash handout program that is for presently 3.6 million people are in this emergency cash handout program. So they receive around $100 US for 5 months. And from now, from September until December, they will be given around $50 per month. So with this problem on the economy, about 3.5 million families are in the poverty line, like classes D and E. So more than half of the Brazilian households are affected by the current crisis. So what happened with food supply during the pandemic? As I said before, Brazil is food self-sufficient in food. In fact, we are presently an agricultural powerhouse. We export meat, soybeans, maize, sugar, coffee, and other products for all over the world, more than 120 countries in the world. But we experienced some disturbance in some food supply chains. Like happened elsewhere, we detected some opportunistic behavior with traders, some higher prices or prices spikes in some products. But the most important source of fresh produce in Brazil, the wholesale markets, they ran smoothly. They are fully operational. The difference is that the wholesale markets in Brazil, they are state-owned markets. We have around 72 around the country. And then we also have supermarkets that respond for about 70% of the food supply. Andrea and Camila, my colleagues, will talk a little about the supermarkets in Brazil. So the main staple food supply was maintained stable, right? Like rice, beans, and meat. We experienced some price spikes. Right now, rice is a problem because the price is very expensive. Also beans, milk, dairy products, eggs, pasta, cooking oil, a lot of produce used every day in Brazil, cooking, experience some price spikes. And of course, fruits and vegetables, because they are highly perishables, we experience some problems too. So what the government did so far? Of course, the first measurements were concerning health and economy, like home office, social distancing, and this program of cash handouts. The Ministry of Agriculture created what they call the COVID-19 Crisis Committee that deals specifically with sanitary issues, public health, labor, food supply, distribution, logistics, trade, and also regulatory stocks in Brazil. What happened is that in the beginning of the epidemic in Brazil, in March and April, we have some problems concerning the food supplies. Some disrupts occur, some stockpiling by consumers, but afterwards, the situation can be considered as almost as normal. And now the food security public policies are responsibility of the Ministry of Citizenship. So food security in Brazil occur in 3 levels, like the federal government, the states, and also municipalities. So many of the food banks or the public school feeding scheme are operated in the municipality level. So that's the importance of the municipality in this moment. So the public schools were closed. This affected the public school feeding scheme, that is very important. For this school feeding scheme, some part of the supply was done by small farmers that have no markets, but then they decided to supply some food baskets to the children's parents instead of the feeding scheme. And another important thing is that popular restaurants that usually sell meals very cheap, less than $20 per meal, 20 cents of dollar, 20 cents of dollar per meal. Some are still running. And then the food banks are very, very important in this moment because they provide fresh products, and also in some parts of the country they are providing meals. So what happened?
Excuse me, Gilmar, you are running out of time.
Okay.
Could you please summarize?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Yes. So what's the problem now? The new normal is that this is something that I want to share. This is the news that were released today. So the food index in Brazil worst. Now we have 1/3 of Brazilian population in some kind of food insecurity. That corresponds to 84.9 million people. Is the worst number since 2024. So the perspectives, I left a lot of questions. What lessons we can learn? How to mitigate threats to food security? Do we need new food security public policies in Brazil? How to handle the social inequality problem? How to improve food access to the vulnerable population? I didn't mention, but the Brazilian Congress just approved the Good Samaritan bill on last June. So we are expecting the impacts of the Good Samaritan bill on food waste. And if the new shopping and eating habits will be new forms of waste. But the most important message I want to left is that food security and food losses and wastes are back to the political agenda in Brazil. Thank you. Sorry about the time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. If there are any questions, please do not hesitate to put it into the Q&A section.
Okay.
We have a small change of our presentations. The next presenter will be Gustavo Porpino. He works also for Embrapa, but in a different department than Gilmar. He is part of the RD&I team for Embrapa Foods and Territories. This is a new research center with the topic of urban food policy and urban agriculture. And Gustavo is very experienced with food loss and waste projects, national and also on an international level. And I'm very curious about your presentation. Please try to stick to the 10 minutes. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Felicitas. Good day, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join the World Sustainability Forum today. I'm just sharing here my screen. So I will talk about the consumer side of this problem. We know food losses and waste, it's present all over the food chain, but the focus of my research, this presentation is more on the consumer side of it. In the last 4 years, we have coordinated at the Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation 2 projects supported by the European Union Brazil sector dialogues, which was really interesting, especially because we did the first quantitative study about consumer food waste in Brazil, and we must mention that this was a nationally representative sample. The study started with a survey, an online survey that was answered by consumers all over Brazil, from every Brazilian region. And as I said, given that it was a representative of the Brazilian population, most of these 1,764 families were from the low middle income segment. And in the second phase, from this amount of 1,764 questionnaires, 686 families also answered to a food diary, which was really interesting. In a digital platform, a mobile platform, they could answer which foods were consumed and wasted in the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and also to take pictures of the foods wasted, so we could measure the actual amount of food wasted, and also we could identify the most wasted food products in Brazil. The fact that they also uploaded a photo of the food products was interesting for us to check the answers. So if a given family said in the questionnaire that they were discarding half kilo of beef in a given day, we could check if the photo was actually showing half kilo of beef, for instance. The final amount we could measure is this one that I'm presenting here. So on average, this is important to mention, this is an average, a Brazilian family wastes almost 109 kilos of food per year, and on a per capita, when we analyze this per capita, is for 1.6 kilos of foods per year. Given this is an average, of course, there are families that waste much less than this, and other families, other segments that waste even more. The consumer market in Brazil is very diverse, very segmented, not only in terms of income, but also in cultural terms, and these behavioral factors, the culture of the consumers as well, explains better the variance in food wasted than the income of the family, which was interesting to note. I know that in Uruguay here in Latin America also did a measurement study about consumer food waste, and they also realized that income does not explain well the variance of the amounts of food wasted here in Latin America, because we have this culture of abundance that is also present in the low income segment. When it comes to the food types, it was interesting to know that rice, beans, beef, and chicken, that are the most consumed food products in Brazil, they are also the most wasted food products. So as we can see in this graph, from every kilo wasted by a Brazilian family, on average, 220 grams is composed of rice, 160 grams composed of beans, 200 grams composed of beef, and 150 grams composed of chicken. It is important to note that we did the survey before the pandemic, and it would be very interesting to do another quantitative study here in Brazil post-COVID-19 to see how this pandemic might have impacted the consumption of foods in relation to food waste. We believe that consumers in general here in Brazil are more aware of the problem of food waste because the pandemic forced most families to stay more at home and to cook more at home, and they are now perceiving that food waste is a problem on the household. And also because, as Gilmar mentioned, food prices have increased a lot here in Brazil, especially rice and beef. And then consumers, are, of course, are planning more the purchase at supermarkets or or at street stalls. Talking about the pandemic and the potential impacts of the pandemic in the consumer food waste habits, before the pandemic, we could also perceive a tendency of consumers to seek for healthy lifestyles, mindful consumption, buying local. I'm sorry, I did not translate this one. Comprar localmente, buying local. The diner for one. The households now, there are a lot of couples without kids or even single households. And then these tendencies during the pandemic are still present, but not only that, they are growing faster. And we believe this might also contribute, this healthy lifestyle, this mindful consumption might positively impact the consumer food waste. Gilmar, our colleague Gilmar also mentioned before in the last presentation about this new law that Brazil has just approved. This law was approved during the pandemic already. We had about, for you to have an idea, 30 projects in the Brazilian Congress that has something related to the consumer food waste mitigation or food losses mitigation. And this one that was approved, they allow even prepared foods to be donated. And as you see, the donor and the intermediary will only respond if they have the donated food. If I mean, they have now the law supports the donation, and I would think, I believe the challenge is how to connect more the donors and food banks, for instance. In relation to food banks, Brazil has about 168 food banks in the national network of food banks. But the challenge we have is that most of the food banks are located in the south or southeast of Brazil. And the problem of food insecurity is much higher in the north and northeast regions. Then we have to support more this food bank network. We have to analyze how to improve the number of food banks in the north and northeast regions. And then comes the challenge on how to connect more retailers with food banks. If we want to integrate the food waste fight with this important issue of also contributing to food security and nutrition. Another problem is not a problem, but another challenge I see in relation to this new law is how to guarantee the food safety of the foods donated, considering, as I said, that this law allows even prepared foods to be donated. Even a hospital, if a hospital wants to donate prepared foods, they are allowed, considering what is mentioned in this new law. I just said the Brazil Food Bank Network has 168 units, and it's important to note that 91 food banks belongs to this SESC network, which is the Brazilian Commerce Service of Commerce. These 91 food banks, they work really well. They have a great infrastructure. They have trucks that collect the foods that are being donated, for instance, by supermarket chains. This is a model, a governance model that I believe should be multiplied in Brazil. And the challenge here is how to increase this network. 168 seems to be a good number, but Brazil is the size of a continent. And as I said, the great majority of food insecurity are in the north and northeast regions, and the food banks most of them are in the south and southeast. The Brazilian program, or the school feeding program in Brazil, is another public policy that it's a positive case and it's working well. I believe we could improve these two axes of communications for behavior change and nutrition education in the school feeding program. And school gardens might play this role. School gardens are not new, but in Brazil they are growing in the last years, especially in the states that face more food insecurity, such as Maranhão and Piauí, in the northeast of Brazil. And it's very interesting to use the school gardens as educative tools to teach kids, young students, on how hard it is to grow foods, and also to positively impact the behavior of these kids. School gardens are really interesting because they promote healthy and sustainable diets, and we believe that in schools with school gardens, there is a tendency to have even less food waste in the cafeterias, which is interesting. In general, I believe that this issue of food losses and waste to be mitigated, we need first and foremost a focus on circular food systems. When I say circular food systems, I'm not considering just the production phase, but circularity in all stages of the food chain. We need to promote shorter food supply chains, especially because Brazil, Argentina are quite big countries, and not always the food production are around the cities, and cities respond for 8% of the food consumption on average in the world. We need also to promote more multi-stakeholder platforms. It's very important for institutions such as Embrapa that focuses on research, development, and innovation to interact, to cooperate with the private sector, with startups, and I believe Daniele, our colleague, will talk more about it. The governance as well. We need to integrate more the different levels of government. Brazil, as I said, is the size of a continent. The federal government might lead the strategy, but we also need to involve the states and the municipalities especially, and the political will. Without political will in the different levels of government, we won't advance as fast as we want. In general, this is what I want to say today. On these links, you can find several materials and also a brief explanation about this project I mentioned. As I said, we had two projects in the Sector Dialogues European Union Brazil. The first one was more based on measuring consumer food waste in Brazil, and the second one was based on communications for behavior change and also educational. We developed educational materials for students, for teachers, and these educational materials, of course, they are in Portuguese. They are free. You can download as a curiosity on this website here, semdesperdicio.org. And this is, for instance, on the right side, it's a comic book that we launched last year that we are promoting on the digital version for students and teachers. And this is my email, and it was a great pleasure to be with you guys today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, and all the best for you. Unfortunately, Gustavo has to leave now, but if there are any questions related to his presentation, we have other experts in our team, and they are happy to answer your questions. So I would like to hand over to Luciana Vieira. She is a professor at the Department of Production and Operations Management at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Sao Paulo. And in parallel, she is currently a senior fellow at the King's College in London. She told me that she worked together with food banks in the last months, especially in the crisis. And her presentation will focus on the multi-stakeholder initiatives of food loss and waste mitigation. So, Luciana, the floor is yours, and please think about the 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felicitas, for the presentation. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to share a bit of our research. So this is part of a large research project that I was coordinating at FGV in São Paulo, and many people here were also collaborating in this project. So in the beginning, the whole idea was to how to mitigate or how to reduce food and loss and waste from a value chain perspective. So that's what we've been looking at the literature. But then we realized that just looking at vertical linkages would not really tackle food losses and waste. We needed to have something that would be more systemic to approach this problem. So we came to this concept of multi-stakeholder initiative for food loss and waste mitigation. And this presentation is basically a summary of a paper that has been approved for a special issue on food waste at the Industrial Marketing Management. So I will shortly talk about this concept of multi-stakeholder. Many might not be familiarized with it. I'm going to tell about this national strategy that Brazil had developed, and we have members of this committee here in this group. So I'm going to talk about how it worked. Also how we try to contribute to this debate on multi-stakeholder, trying to see, identifying their practices in reducing food loss and waste, and some final remarks. So multi-stakeholder initiatives is a new concept, but it's very aligned to the SDG 17, where we talk about private and public partnership. So you have a round table where civil society, business, and government try to find a common solution. Usually, literature has been pointing out wicked problems, those problems that are environmental and that affect collectively. They affect everybody. And multi-stakeholder initiative are these actions where you have cross-sector partnerships, and they try to create solutions for these problems. And this concept has been used, for example, for the palm oil, for deforestation, for the forest stewards council. So, there's being applied to food sector, but in different ways. And we thought at that moment that would be adequate to use this concept to see what was happening in Brazil in terms of food losses and waste reduction. So our questions at that time was to try to identify the roles of these stakeholders that were kind of meeting voluntary standards, because we don't have a regulation in Brazil for food losses and waste, but we have some voluntary standards, and they are cross-sector. So we wanted to understand why these different stakeholders were being motivated and what are the processes that they were doing to try to reduce this food loss and waste. Because in Brazil, as we don't have regulation, we also don't have any kind of consumer pressure to reduce food loss and waste. As Gustavo was talking on consumer behavior, this is very low perceived in Brazil. And we want to see how this systemic, how this complementary approach could be solve out this problem or reduce. So at the time, I started to participate in many meetings and talk to the people that was part of this multi-stakeholder initiative led by the Ministry of Social Development at that time, the Brazilian Intersectoral Strategy for the Reduction of Food Loss and Waste Committee and Policy Deliberation. But then we could understand that there are different roles that they were playing in this committee. We have a different kind of stakeholders. So it's not just one kind of stakeholders, but the stakeholders that were asking for regulations. For example, Gustavo and Gilmar told about the Good Samaritan regulation. That was something that many stakeholders and civil society were claiming, but it was just approved now during the pandemic. You have the role of the public agencies on preparing these rules, but they are also voluntary standards. So you have also, for example, university researchers that are providing some scientific basis for these rules, for these standards. And then you have those that need to comply with those standards, like food processing, retailers, startups, food banks. So we try to categorize them in different ways. And here I'm just going to mention, because this is in the paper, and if you want to see the paper is already printed, we try to use on this table as a contribution for other multi-stakeholder initiatives, trying to see how these roles of stakeholders were also affecting the process that they were performing for reducing food losses and waste. So we look at, for example, social movements, and I was earlier today at this forum listening to Renato Maluf, who has a large experience about Hunger Zero and about all the participatory policies that have been happening in Brazil, and they've been dismantling right now. But then we see that these stakeholders like NGOs, like social movements, food startups, they are now leading this agenda. We have, of course, with the change in the political environment in Brazil, less action from the part of the federal government. But on the other hand, we have lots of actions and initiatives happening at the local level. So at the local level, at the value chain level, things are still running. And I think this multi-stakeholder initiative was kind of a trigger to this debate in Brazil. So even if there's a low engagement from some stakeholders or from consumers in general, we have now people like our group that are trying to discuss this, that are debating this. And of course, I think with the COVID-19, it has increased the level of food insecurity in Brazil. So when we talk about reducing food loss and waste, for our country where we have this huge inequality, we are not just tackling, environmental impact, but we are also looking at social inclusion. So we are looking at food redistribution. So how we can prevent or redirect these losses or this waste for the food banks, for vulnerable people. So I think my main remarks, and then you can see the paper where we describe all this process and all these stakeholders and how the agenda has been evolving in Brazil. I think is that what this multi-stakeholder initiative that we analyzed at the point was pointing out is that on the public sector, there's a lot of social interest in terms of inclusion and about food security. We cannot say that there is a causal relation between food loss and waste and food security. But in Brazil, if we can connect this production and consumption and also this waste, to the food banks, for example, we are going to reduce the food insecurity that has been increasing in the last 5 years, as Gilmar was showing some recent data. Private sector, of course, is engaging in this agenda, not just because of for being good for social responsibility, but also because it's a way of managing the waste. So food waste is also waste for retailers, for example. So they are engaging this agenda because it's a cost saving and it's also increased their reputation. So we see that there are some conflicts and different agendas in the group from public and private sector, for example, but they are trying to debate on a round table and they are doing these separate actions, but they are converging at the end to the main aim. In terms of advocacy and academia, it's still weak. This is a recent topic, so that's why we're trying to have more debates like this one in different forums, international and national. Consumers are still engaging very low in this agenda, but there is more social norm, like social pressure for people that are kind of wasting food or throwing food on the bin. And I think the main point that we need to discuss in Brazil and pressure as academics and researchers is why these are only voluntary standards, why we don't pressure to make it regulatory, compulsory standards, that will pressure the whole value chain to act to reduce food waste and losses. So I was very brief, but here is the paper. So Danielle, who is going to present next, is the first author, and Marcia is also a co-author. it's already online. It's coming in a special issue, so you have all the details. And here is the Kaizen, is the document that this group, this committee produced, and you can download. There is an English version. Thanks very much, and I hope I could manage the time and be able to make my presentation properly. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luciana. It was perfect. Thank you. We have some spare time, so that's great. So we will move to the next presentation, which is presented by Danielle Matzenbacher. She is a PhD candidate in business at the Federal University in Rio Grande do Sul. And in her thesis, she analyzed the entrepreneurs and their motivation to work with food loss and waste and the prevention of food loss and waste. She was also studying at different universities in Estonia and Canada. And she's also the academic coordinator for the bilateral cooperation with Sweden. So Danielle will talk about the entrepreneurship opportunities for food loss and waste mitigation. And Danielle, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Felicitas. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Eker-Matzenbacher. I also speak on behalf of Professor Márcia Barcelos. I'm gonna share my presentation with you. Okay, so my presentation is about entrepreneurship opportunities for food loss and waste mitigation. And the main idea behind my presentation is that the private sector, as the main driver of economic activity and important source of creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship, should be involved in an attempt to propose solutions to address food loss and food waste. And what happens is that empirically, we can see the emergence of some entrepreneurs profiting by addressing these problems of food loss and waste, mainly the problems of food waste. And we can define this phenomenon as sustainable entrepreneurship, since in addition to profit, they also aim to generate environmental and social benefits through their commercial activity, okay? So the idea is that this business, they are expected to positively influence the consumer behavior, the retail actions, distribution and marketing actions as well, and in some cases, not all, the government actions too. So over these years, we have been investigating some questions. For example, what is the motivation of these entrepreneurs? How do they innovate in their business models? What is their impact on society? And how can you foster such initiatives? And during this process, we investigated and collected data in 7 different countries, developed and developing countries as well. So there are very interesting opportunities for entrepreneurship at all stages of the food supply chain, from production to retail. And as you know, the time constraints, I will give you 3 examples that we can have. So the first one is in production, okay? And it's possible to innovate, for example, in new farm models in which food waste is used to produce insect larvae, which is considered now a cheap, ecological, and a nutritional source of protein. And we can use this larvae to feed chickens, to feed fish in farms as fertilizers, and they also can be added as pet food and can be used for human consumption as well. When you talk about restaurants, we found a business model that can save or can reduce for food waste comparing to the other ones. So for example, the buffet serving for variable price, which is the case that the consumer choose the food they want to put on their plate, is the best model to reduce food waste. This research was made before the COVID time. So now you don't know how this model, if it's gonna be suitable for this moment or not. But it's even more profitable for the entrepreneurs serving for variable price, comparing with serving for fixed price or to be served for a fixed price, which would be the second one, the case of canteens, for example, and the third one, the cases of a la carte restaurants, okay? Also in the processing stage, it's possible to transform vegetables that look out of the market aesthetic standards into soup, or also they can be manufactured into the baby version. For example, this carrots baby version. And this one here was the main focus of our research, and we found two interesting situations. So the first one is an opportunity that we could find more in developing countries, for example, which is the case of Brazil. So it's startups that they connect, in one side, producers selling food outside the aesthetic standard of the market, or with surplus food, directly with consumers. They use monthly membership and reduced prices comparing to these traditional channels. And this specifically case, at least here in Brazil, they are scaling a lot. They are scaling up a lot now during this COVID time because they deliver at home this food, and they are making a lot of profit with it as well. And another opportunity that has shown to be stronger in developed countries is the development of apps that they use geolocalization, and they connect most cafes, bakeries, restaurants, and supermarkets that or they have the products close to their expiration date, or that they are close to the time to end the activities on that day, and they connect this retail with consumers and also offering lower prices. Of course, there are several other opportunities, but I wish I have time to present them for you. So now I will focus on 4 different things: the entrepreneur's process, the patterns we found related to innovation in business model, their positive impact in society, and how can you foster such initiatives. So regarding the entrepreneur process, I would like to highlight first thing is that the experience in entrepreneurship is not relevant. So we found that what influence and motivated these entrepreneurs is their prior experience, plus the sensitivity towards some environmental or social problem. And added to the situation, it is very important the knowledge of similar initiatives that may be in another cities, another regions, and in the most of the cases we found in another countries. And also the person's previous experiences and skills. And by this I mean personal, educational, and also professional, but entrepreneur activities is not really relevant. Another question is that the initial idea is extremely relevant because it ends up going a few changes until the venture launch. And probably this is due to the fact that many of these initiatives, they don't start the idea for zero, but they reproduce successful business cases from other places. The last pattern I would like to speak here in the entrepreneur process is that the financial investment generally, in most of the cases, is very low. They only receive the external financial support after the first success of this business in the market. And generally, it's focused, even in developed and developing countries, it's focused on better structuring and the scalability of the business. So regarding the business model, I will talk about the value proposition, and I would like to highlight five relevant aspects. The first one is that this new business, they seek to offer lower prices to consumer if you compare it to traditional alternatives in the market. They also extend the convenience to consumers. For example, they use geolocalization. They also go beyond their traditional supply chain. What is this? Is that they engage with multiple stakeholders in activities that, for example, are aimed to raise in people awareness or participate in a social movement, and they need to do these activities to be successful in their business. And for this reason is exactly that they promote in some degree consumer education directly and indirectly through various actions. For example, they use social media, they promote lectures in schools and business, and they also do a lot of interviews in national and in international media. And last, a very interesting point that we saw in our research is that they don't sell a product, but they foster, they sell an idea. They foster the idea of sharing intangible values and the concept of community. So it's something like they sell the idea that's more than a matter of consumption, but they try to extend the idea that these people do more than the others in their surrounding in relation to environmental and social issues. So in relation to their positive social impact, it's possible to identify, to highlight, for example, their institutional pressures that they are able to exert in three different ways. The first one is helping to change people's norms and beliefs regarding the problem of food waste. The second one is encouraging supermarkets or other stakeholders, but mostly retail, to adopt similar actions as them. And the third one is bringing these discussions for the context of public policies. And my last slide is some clues about the possibilities that in somehow might help to foster entrepreneurship to food loss and waste mitigation. And the first one involves educational experience in sustainability, more aligned with the problems of local communities. This is essential. So one possibility, for example, is through project-based learning or practice-based learning. And they can, let's see, bring in local companies or NGOs to present real problems they face and to encourage students in a practical way in the search for solutions for these problems. And this, of course, requires greater integration between university and business, but the idea is that not only the students would be impacted, but also people in this business could have access to new ideas and also new solutions. As Luciana told before, multi-stakeholder initiatives are a very interesting option to bring solutions and new alternatives about the necessities in the food supply chain and the opportunities that these entrepreneurs might have. And finally, public policies, they are essential to stimulate entrepreneurial opportunities for food loss and food waste mitigation. So here you have my contacts, and I would like to say thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Danielle, for your presentation. It was very interesting to see the incentives for the entrepreneurs, and I hope we will have some time left for discussion later.
Okay.
So thank you very much. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Andrea Lago da Silva. She will present the next presentation, which was prepared jointly with Camila Moraes. Both work at the Federal University of São Carlos in Brazil, and they focus their research on the food supply chain management, food waste and food loss and waste, and the resilience in the supply chain. And Andrea will introduce the causes of food waste and practices for mitigation, evidence from Brazilian supermarkets and suppliers. And Andrea, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Felicitas, and thank you, everyone. I will share my screen. This is a result of a project that I've been coordinating in the last 3 years. And the main research is, the main student in this research, it was Camila, that unfortunately is not here today. And this project was financed by FAPESP, CNPq, and CAPES. And what I'm showing here is part of the results. We left the part of resilience out because we have just 10 minutes. Then we are talking about causes of food waste in practice for mitigations. And we are talking about Brazilian supermarkets and their suppliers in fruits and vegetables in general, okay? Then what we have, we realized that in the beginning that we have few studies providing in-depth exploration of causes and reduction practices. And no study has explored the context of the diet formed by retail and suppliers. Of course, as my colleagues told in the other presentations, we have the waste in this diet also has a huge impact, and most of the product's value adding activities has happened. Then if we are talking about sustainable chains, this is a challenge. Then our main question here is how the supplier retail interface has dealt with the causes of food, fruits and, sorry, there's a hero, fruits and legumes waste and practices for the mitigation in Brazil. We have here a picture that Camila took in CEAGESP back in 2018 about the waste. Then we did something about our methodology. We had a literature review where we found 27 causes of food waste and 19 reduction practices. And we did this, it's a large literature review. Then we went to a field research. We start with interviews with specialists that came from consulting, from sector associations, consulting people. Then we did 12 interviews in total. Then we went to case search, and we selected among the 15 largest retail chains in Brazil, supermarket retail chains. We use the diet. Our unit of analysis was the diet. The whole process of distribution between supermarkets, between producers and supermarkets. And in this search, we interviewed 35 people within 4 cases. We also did a lot of observation with a field diary, and also we changed to the analysis of the document. Then we transcribed all the interviews, all the data we had, all the information we codified by key minor, and we ran a content analysis. Okay. We have some papers on that we are finishing. Then in the end, I will share with you guys the main reference. Okay. Then what we had is these causes and these practices. Okay, two conjoint of causes and two sets of practices. Then what we observe, I'm aware of the time. Then we can talk about inadequate packaging and labeling, lack of collaboration, strict standards of appearance and shape. That's some of our colleagues mentioned before. Incorrect rendering, the short shelf life, climate and phytosanitary issues. We have also a lot of problems with transportations, cold chain break, poor logistics network design, and with some practice that we identify that supermarkets and their suppliers were doing at some point is collaborations, is try to share more precise information on the labels, price and promotion strategy, policies, coordination, communication. As other colleagues mentioned, secondary markets too. Then also training for waste reduction and prevention, it's really important. Integrate logistics systems. Then with these results, what we realize, some of these results, some of possible solutions for this diet relationship that all, of course, also affect the chain. We had big problems with cultural aspects, as my colleagues mentioned. Then educate and inform consumers is really a way to deal with this problem. Also, technology, it's a problem. Then we have people in general, suppliers has problem to adopt technology, even in packaging, QR code, information technology that should be shared with all players and also with the customers. Also, we need to improve relationship network. Coordination, collaboration is still, we need still to talk a lot about this. Also prioritize local suppliers or the closest suppliers that they came, because we have many, Brazil is a huge country, then we have many suppliers from really far in terms of Brazil. Then of course some of them we cannot use. We need to use because they are, even if they are far, they are the only suppliers, but as far as we can, we need to prioritize the local ones. Also training and knowledge, improve training and knowledge of operations to avoid waste. But in this sense, we need to include suppliers in the initiative, because in general, retail focus on their own training, their own operations system, not including suppliers. Also, retail don't need not to focus only in its internal operations, because they know that they are wasting, but they need to rethink the way they are acting. For example, they need to rethink promotions. That's something that incentivize at some point waste, even for the consumer, and also in the chain, because they lost themselves in doing this kind of activities, because the concurrents need to react and also think about promotions, then use promotion actions, then it's not really good for the waste problem. And also, as my colleagues mentioned, Brazilian legislative aspects and lack of local government incentives, it's something that we need to think in the chain. Okay. Then we have this small model that is still a proposal for possible solutions, how we can make this work in the chain. This model comes from Camila's thesis, and we are preparing some publication with these models, but I'm more than happy to hear your impressions, your suggestions about this model. Then we have technology, we have financial issues that we need to deal. We have the role of NGOs. We have also regulation, legislation. We have the government role that we need to rethink. Also in the chain, around the chain, we need location, that's a problem. Communication, organizational reputation, it's also a problem in all the players. We have the work with private label that they take really care about this kind of products, but it goes with their name. Also teamwork, even inside the company and outside the company, it's a thing that we need to develop. And also the relationship network, something that we need to improve together with communication, training, and knowledge. Okay. Then we had some suggestions to future studies, to analyze cause and practice in other diets and triads in the same chain, to research and compare with other regions. That's something that's missing in our project, to analyze financial impacts and reduction for the reduction of practice, also to identify relationship among causes, to identify waste hierarchies and in different food chains. And I need to thank you. You can contact me or Camila about these results, and this research was supported by these three places, these three institutions, and also by UFSCar, and now Camila is a professor in a small university called UniToledo. Okay, thank you very much, Felista, and everyone.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for the very brief presentation. It was very interesting to see the interaction of retailers and their suppliers in Brazil. We have a similar study at the moment in Germany, and it's interesting. It would be interesting to share their experiences. So we have, I think, a little bit more than 10 minutes left for the discussion. So far, we explained everything so in a very proper way. So there are no questions at the moment, but this is not the problem because I have some questions to our panel. You almost all of you issued that there should be more regulation. You mentioned this this new law dealing with food donation, but do you think which other regulations would be necessary in Brazil to facilitate the food loss and waste prevention? So perhaps all of you can have a very small or short answer or answer on that.
Yes, in my opinion, what happened is that we cannot estimate the impact of this law until now, because I think restaurants will be the most affected by this Good Samaritan law. And I think that large supermarket chains, they already have some kind of scheme to give away the fresh produce, for example, or expired products, but without legislations. So because in Brazil we have interesting phenomena. Some laws are not applied. Meaning, we have a law, but nobody obeys. You understand? So I think that's a little bit the case of the food donation. But until now, we cannot estimate the real impact of this Good Samaritan law on restaurants, for example, that will be more affected. Then I left my colleagues complete.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with Gilmar because everybody has been asking for this flexibility to donate, because this is a problem even for the owner of the restaurant. He cannot donate because of the liability of the food, you know, the expire date and things like this. So thinking about food safety, but not food security. So I think this is an important move, but we have to see how it works. And in terms of the market, I don't know if it's a regulation, but some kind of pressure, because what we see through the value chain perspective is when Andrea is talking about retailing, the retailer basically transfer, you know, all these waste to the, or the loss to the weakest link. That might be the horticultural supplier that has to take back, you know, all these, they have like contracts that they have to go back and take all these expired or all these products that were not sold. So the cost goes to this weakest link, that is the supplier, the small and medium-sized suppliers. And I think also we have to put the guilt on us as consumers, because we are very connected to the shape, to the aesthetics of the food. You know, we are still buying on street markets or in supermarkets, looking at the shape, at the color, and not to the nutritional content. So we are generating this cost to the distribution channels, because we are touching fruits, we are touching food, and we are buying more than we need. So I think everybody has to be, in a way, pressure. And as we don't have as a society a social norm, you know, I think we need some kind of regulation as fine, because then the supermarket is going to educate, is going to give some information, is going to help the small suppliers also to deal with this waste. Because basically what we look is that we are transferring, you know, even to the household. So we have street markets, and at the end of the day, everything is cheap. So you buy more than you know that you are going to use, but it's cheap. So at the end, you throw everything in the bin. So I think it has cultural issues, but on the other hand, if you don't have any kind of fine or, you know, or safeguards, it's going to be very difficult to change in this generation.
Okay, thank you very much. Danielle, you would also like to continue?
Yes, going this way, Luciana was thinking about pressures. For example, we have here in São Paulo the biggest wholesale of the Latin America, which is the CEAGESP. And what they implemented there is that they charge a fee for the waste generated by the producer or the traders there in that place. So I believe we would need some regulation or something related to fees and food waste. We need some more pressures, not so voluntary actions as we are having right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andrea?
Yes, and yes, I agree. I think even if the regulation is important, as Shubham mentioned and others, sometimes we are not obliged to comply with these regulations. Then I think more pressure and more pressure also in the consumer, maybe incentivize, let people know. What I realized in the last events that I participate is that more and more people tell me that they don't know about these rules that supermarkets have in general, and then we need to talk about this. And always the supplier is kind of penalized with these specifications that supermarkets always had. Then we need to talk about this and make more pressure and try to convince people to consume sometimes products that are not perfect at some point, but they are enough good for everyone. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Felista, sorry, there's someone that sent me questions.
Yes,
Can
I saw it. Would you
Yeah.
like to reply on this question?
Yes, here by voice.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Maíra answered, where is the gap? The main practice that we point as important by specialists, we are not seeing the supermarkets. Yes, Maíra, what we saw in supermarkets, that's some of them know the practice, but they don't, for them it's not so important to apply all these practices because they are not losing. Okay, then training, for example, it's a gap that they need to work on, but they need to work constantly on this because they have a lot of people change in the positions that works with waste. Then they need to how to say this, to follow each day how this practice, how people are dealing with this. There is a gap. Also, there is a gap on share with the suppliers the techniques that they know about. They don't know really how to say this, how to work with the demand, with the variations. They know at some point. They don't share this information with suppliers. Then this is a gap that we need to work if we talk about coordination. Okay. I think I spent, I use so much time, Felista. Let me know if I can.
No problem. We have 4 minutes left, or perhaps only 3 minutes left for our session. And I think it's good to have a question here.
Yes.
And there is another coming, I think. Now, food loss is a critical issue. In developing countries, we produce less, whereas the loss is high at different stages. We do not have high technology during harvesting, also process. Legislation and its enforcement is also limited. Hence, farmers are not benefited from their products, and consumers too. Let's share. Please let's share your experiences. Perhaps I can say something to this question. Because it's very interesting for me to see it every time when we have discussions, international discussions, that perhaps the reasons are different, but the behavior of the people is the same and the problems are the same. So also in Germany, we discuss if legislation is better than a voluntary agreement with different stakeholders, and how should the pressure be built on different stakeholders and different levels of the food supply chain. So any further answer for the question which was raised? Yes, Danielle, we have only 1.5 minutes left.
Okay, when you're collecting some data with producers, I made directly visits to a lot of them and especially in production stage, I'll talk about, I asked them, do you have food loss or food waste here? No, I don't have. So I usually ask them, can we walk around your farm? And yes, of course. And we were walking there, and I could see that old lettuce in the field, for example, was left in the field. And I was asking, but what is this? It's not suitable for selling, for marketing anymore. Oh, no, I didn't have any market for it, and I didn't plan my production as well. So I just left it there. So they don't see the food loss, and in this case, food waste that I will talk about as a problem. They see as part of the production process. So I believe we need to change many norms and beliefs since production to consumption, and not only technological things in this food supply chain. This was my view during data collection.
Yes, that's correct. I agree totally with this
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah.
So I think we are at the end of our session. Thank you very much for all of the 44 participants, and I hope we had fruitful information and a fruitful session for you. And if you have any further questions, please contact the speakers directly. And I see Max Bergmann is already here.
I am. I never left. As a matter of fact, I have been here since Tuesday at 1. And today we started at 7 o'clock in Japan. And we slowly moved, not quite across the globe, but a pretty large part of the globe to end in Brazil. So I'm very, very happy about the near perfect inclusion of the globe. We had Europeans, some North American, definitely South American, and Sub-Saharan African, and many other kinds of presentations. We actually intended to have a multi-topic, we intended to have between 6 and 8 different streams before COVID. We're going to start to call before COVID BC. And we're eventually, probably not as soon as we think, we're going to call it after COVID AC. But in the meantime, when I listen to the many presentations that we have had in this, on the one hand, very rich, nevertheless a reduced World Sustainability Forum, but a tremendously rich one. I followed mostly food security and agriculture. In terms of the conference itself, I'm actually incredibly pleased, because if somebody would have said, let's actually do an online event of this kind a year ago, I would have said it will never work, it's not possible. And my, did we learn quickly what is possible. And maybe if we can pick up this learning capacity and maybe expand it in the direction of sustainability, wouldn't that be great? I'm also very pleased because we had many presenters who probably under normal circumstances would have never been able to join us in Geneva. And there were some, the style and the type of presentations tended to be very mixed, but not just mixed in terms of good or bad, mixed in things that we're usually not used to in live conferences. So it's really nice to actually have graduate students or assistant professors who would never get the budget to travel across the globe and be able to afford a Geneva hotel, to actually take center stage and actually inform and teach us. So we contributed tremendously to sustainability by actually being stuck. Now, I would love for all of us to now go to a nice venue, a hotel, or an alternative bar where I could show you some nice places of where I am. I'd love to be in Brazil. I've been a number of times in Brazil to know that I'm very jealous of some of the people. So the personal contact is missing. That is the hard part about this. So it's always good and bad. Now, when I listen to many of the presentations in the last 3 days, and this also applies to yours, And this is not a question you have to respond to. I really wonder to what extent COVID is going to really mess things up. Because of course, we think about, of course, food security and agriculture is going to become much, much more important because of the consequences of COVID. But in many ways, I wonder to what extent even the frameworks, the concepts, the theories are going to be outdated very, very quickly by the realities that are going to catch up with us. So we don't know, but I hope that we're going to meet each other next year at the World Sustainability Forum, and then you're going to report to me how things have or have not changed and to what extent. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the audience. It's actually more than the ones that you see on the screen, because we also have a YouTube live stream that people are following. So we have two different ways to follow this. I want to thank everybody in the audience. I want to thank the speakers, the chairs, the keynotes, who have contributed tremendously to a new world of doing international conferences. And maybe in the name of the whales and the dolphins, I thank everybody for not having flown to your conference sites. So thank you so much for being here, for sticking around, to those who are in Europe or maybe in Asia, for your tremendous work and contribution. And please keep working on these topics that are becoming even more important. And I'm looking forward to next year.